We had a interesting Slack conversation. I guess most of our conversations are on Slack anymore, which is weird to have. But so we had a discussion about the Boeing Max 9 and the door plug, I'll call it, that left that Alaska Airlines airplane a couple of weeks ago now. And in the United States, there's a lot of discussion online about the CEO of Boeing should be let go and they should restructure Boeing and do a bunch of changes there. And my comment is, well, why are we getting rid of the CEO of Boeing for what intrinsically was probably a one single mechanic that left bolts out or didn't put nuts on or something of the sort at his station versus a sort of a systemic problem that's happened at pretty much everything that's happening in Spain at the moment. It's a much broader problem where Siemens Gamesa hasn't made any management changes at the highest level. They have evidently made changes at the engineering and some production level and probably some managers. There's just two different approaches to that system, but we seem to go back and forth about, you know, Boeing should hold everybody accountable. Yeah, maybe. But at Siemens, the same level of discourse wasn't there, and which was weird. So maybe we can just describe both sides of this situation. And being on the engineer, I guess because we're engineers, we see both sides of it. Maybe that's part of it.
Well, but keep in mind, by the way, the Siemens Energy also did get rid of the Siemens Gamesa CEO like 2 or 3 times before any of this happened. So I think maybe they were just looking for continuity. This wasn't necessarily because of the blade thing.
No, but I think as Rosemary's going to hopefully point out here, when Siemens Energy acquired the remaining parts of Siemens Gamesa, immediately there were problems. Like they got really blindsided by it, and yet they didn't make any leadership changes, and that's their prerogative. They own it. The Boeing situation I don't think really applies here, but it does seem to be a connection, at least in the United States, on the problems. And
Yeah, so I think our Slack discussion started with somebody, I can't remember who, saying, what's a CEO got to do with it? This was just one manufacturing worker who forgot to, put some plugs in. That's on him. That's his fault. He didn't do that. No, he or she. And I said, no, it can never. A problem of this scale, it can't be possible for that to happen. If it's possible for one person to have a bad day and cause a major safety incident like this, then that is a systematic problem that the CEO is ultimately responsible for after, a number of other layers. So, like with something like this door plug, your first line of defense, I guess, is, the design. There should be some redundancy so that even if, something gets left off, it's still safe. Then second, in your manufacturing process, it shouldn't be possible to just forget to do something. So, you have a range of ways that you try to make it very hard to do to manufacture incorrectly. So you'd have, written instructions, you'd have training. Then they'll also do things like, if you've got a certain number of fasteners, then they will be pre-kitted. So, the number of fasteners, not like the worker goes over to a shelf and pulls out 4 plugs and puts them in. And it's like, oh, oops, it was supposed to have 5, but you forgot one. It should, come with every fastener that worker needs for their shift should be pre-kitted. So that would be the second one. Third, you can do things like weighing assemblies to make sure that, they weigh what they're supposed to because they've got all the parts in it. Or you can do other quality testing, at that factory floor level. Then, you should have some sort of quality assurance team that is going around and checking that everything is being done right. So it's kind of like, layers and layers and layers. So if they didn't have that kind of redundancy built in, then, that's the head of engineering's fault. And, who chose the head of engineering and make sure they're doing a good job? The CEO. So, it kind of, there's the worker, there's the supervisor, there's the person that was doing the kitting, there's a QA person, there's the QA person's supervisor, there's the, there's so many people that should have had to fail for this to happen. And if they didn't all fail, and it was, a freak occurrence that they will then, change their processes for. But if, the system was designed so that a single person can have a bad day and cause a problem like this, then that is ultimately on the CEO for not making sure that they have that redundancy, throughout such a safety critical thing as an aeroplane. So yeah, that's my take on it.
Okay, and that's a good take, right? So you're saying that there's multiple groups within Boeing that should have caught that problem. My take on it is that was done, right? So they had all those people in place. They did, right? It'd be different if they didn't have a quality organization or if they didn't had a look at a redundant design, which they did, right? So they had multiple layers there before the door came off. It didn't come off on the first flight. It came off on like flight 20 or something, right? So it had something had changed over time, and mechanics and technicians were alerted to the fact because the pilots alerted to the fact they had pressurization losses. So they had people looking at it who didn't diagnose it properly at the airline. It's sort of a lot of people in order to get to an accident situation. There's usually a lot of people who didn't catch on to what the real problem was before it happened. I look at it from a different perspective in that, like, the CEO has nothing to do with that. Obviously, a company like Boeing has audits and inspections and auditors and oversight, and the FAA is over there and their internal processes, right? So they built in multiple layers to go catch these things. If it didn't catch this, then they obviously need to go back and look. I look at it on the wind turbine side, where the failures tend to be more systemic, and where are those quality controls in place? And they don't have those things. They don't have the level of oversight. They don't necessarily have all the ISO certificates. They don't necessarily have the audits like they probably should, like a Boeing would have. But it's just as critical importance, right? When we had the icing events down in Texas, it told you how important wind or any energy source is, that people die. Like, a lot of people died.
It's not as important, though. I mean, it's reasonable that there's a difference.
No, there's not really much difference. It's like 70% of the energy in Iowa is from electricity, and
I mean, come on. I mean, an airplane dropping out of the sky and killing everyone on board is a worst case scenario than a wind farm icing up and
100 people. But how many people died in the icing event, Joel?
Oh, it was lot more than that max 9. It was double digits.
Okay, that is not caused by wind turbine quality issues. Come on, we can go back and have a look at all of the causes of that, but it is not because de-icing systems failed. I mean, it's maybe one of the causes is that arguably they should have purchased wind turbines with de-icing systems. No, the engineers had nothing to do with whether they don't choose whether to put an icing system in. That's a commercial decision.
What do you think Boeing is? Boeing is a commercial company.
That was the developer's decision not to buy a thing with an icing system for Texas, because it's, icing in Texas is a once in a whatever event.
No, it's stupid. That's why I said arguably, but it's not an engineer that decides that anyway. It's a commercial decision, not an engineering failure like this Boeing thing is. I mean, if we want the same level of quality control in a wind turbine as in an airplane, then it's going to cost more like an airplane costs and have the same maintenance costs as an airplane costs, and then we don't have any wind turbines because they are way too expensive. So, I mean, you can't you can't demand the same type of quality.
If you do that, Rosemary, though, then you have problems, Siemens Gamesa, and you have problems because you don't have that hierarchy there. You don't have those structures in place. And when it does go sideways, like it did with Siemens Gamesa, why is then the heads of Siemens Gamesa not responsible for that? I get the Boeing thing. They got plenty of layers of organization. Siemens Gamesa didn't.
I'm not saying that they shouldn't be. It's ultimately leadership in either case. And I think that in both cases, probably they had the systems in place. But then, when you have the reality of commercial pressures where you're trying to cut costs and get projects out faster, develop faster than your standard procedures would allow you to, then you get pressure from the top down to cut corners, to not quite follow the, like you usually do a technology development process like a stage gate model where, you do phase 1 of development, and then at the end of that, you're supposed to have met certain criteria, which means that you are given the all clear from, certain gatekeepers to move through the next phase. And it's really common if you have, a specific end date that you have to reach for commercial reasons, that you'll say, okay, well, we haven't met this one thing, but we're going to move through and do that in the next phase as well. And, that's quite normal, fine. But if it ends up being you're skipping most of the checks that you're supposed to have and moving forward before you have fully, eliminated the risk that you were supposed to, it can get too much and you can end up with failures because, like how else could it be that so many different people who should have caught a problem didn't? It can only be because there was some systematic thing that's changed all of their their job compared to how it used to be. And then in the case of the Siemens Gamesa thing, I also still think that it's possible that it was just honestly something weird that nobody expected, with likely some sort of weird response to it that was probably like politically or commercially motivated to, maybe sweep something that seemed small at the time under the rug, and has in hindsight turned out to be a bad decision. But no matter what the company, that the responsibility ends with the CEO, and there's a chain of responsibility all the way down.
So why did they fire the engineers at Siemens Gamesa?
It's shocking to me. I don't think that's the right call. Any more than you would fire that one worker that forgot something. I mean, you could, but
Though I think you should.
you could fire that person. You could fire that person, but if you think that is the end of your problems, then you deserve to be also fired and responsible for the next problem that occurs.
If you repeatedly left the bolts out of a door, because it's gonna be one person. I'm telling you before this all comes out, there'll be one person.
If the CEO of Boeing looks at this and says, I'm going to fire that worker, that one worker that forgot that bolts, there you go, end of problem. Boeing is an A+ super duper quality company again. That CEO absolutely deserves to be fired, and for the next problem that happens, he should be personally responsible for the consequences, because it's obvious that is just total negligence to think that you can take the worker at the very bottom of the pile, fire them. I mean, if your company is built on your lowest paid workers needing to do the right thing every time, then everything that's built above that is it's like a sandcastle that's built on.
Apply that to Siemens Gamesa.
I think that at the end of the day, it's a cultural thing. If Siemens Gamesa was not a company in Northern Europe, and that company was headquartered in, I don't care, Boulder, Colorado, Arlington, Virginia, whatever, the same calls would be happening. It would be going, that guy's responsible, because we're more of a capitalistic society that isn't propped up. When you have the German government going, oh, we'll give you some loans, we'll help you out, we'll do all this stuff like that. I mean, this is a really stupid and ignorant thing to say, but people in the US have been saying that about business in the EU for a long time.
I'm not saying the same thing shouldn't happen to Siemens Gamesa. I'm saying what should happen at Boeing, and it should be similar at Siemens Gamesa. I'm not saying that there's no responsibility further up. There is. It's the same. Different issues, and potentially different causes, but in both cases, you can't just say, oh, it was. Imagine if Siemens Gamesa do their root cause analysis and they find out that on every day that one of these defective blades were built, this one worker was working. Fire them. Now our problem's gone. Continue on our merry way without making any changes. I mean, that would be absolutely nuts. Also, to think that you have now solved a problem. I mean, you have to look at how that worker was able to make a mistake. And in fact, I mean, anybody who's done root cause analysis will say you can't end your root cause analysis at a person did something wrong. That's never the root cause. Never ever.
It's multiple people.
People would never be the issue. It's so easy. It's what everybody. It has to be a systematic thing. Otherwise, you can't fix it. Because otherwise you're saying your solution is, oh, okay, well, evidently this project team just really sucked. So next time we'll pick people that don't suck, and then we won't have any problems anymore. Like, you can't. That's not a way to ensure quality for your company moving forward. You have to have. You have to have. Yeah, it would help. Maybe one of your things is, better employee, a better way to ensure that employees are higher quality, making sure that their training is better, all of those things to end up at the same, result, that you have less sucky employees. But it's not just, it's a system that you're putting in place to make sure that it has to happen that way. It's just, it's the way that people always want to go down that way of blaming somebody. A person, and thinking, we would never do something so stupid. And of course, with hindsight, you wouldn't do something so stupid, but every mistake that you've done, you wouldn't go back in time and do it again now that you know that that's a possibility.
Sure, but Rosemary, there's a difference between doing something that's like, on the fringes of technology versus leaving out the bolts. That's going to be, I would almost guarantee it's going to come down to a person in the Boeing situation. It's not. Probably not systemic. It's a person.
No, this is my hill to die on. I 1,000,000% disagree with you there. No, I can't agree on that, or even agree to disagree. I think you're wrong.
Oh, okay. I mean, it's a prediction. It's not a certainty. It's a prediction. I think what happened at Siemens Gamesa, because they've basically admitted it, is saying they had a design group and manufacturing group that made a lot of gross errors. That's what they're saying, and this is why they're probably going to get sued, because we've seen the lawsuits start to pile up, is they essentially admitted that the design group had some sort of catastrophic design issue that they should have caught earlier, and then before they made a couple thousand blades.
Could that same thing be true for this Boeing MAX 9 aircraft at the end of the day? In 6 months, can we hear that? Yeah, engineering group failed, and we're going to get rid of all the engineers. Is that going to happen at Boeing?
No, because as Rosemary's pointed out, there should be sort of a belt and suspender approach to design, and she's right. In aerospace, there is. So in that design, there are 4 bolts to hold it 4 different ways, and those 4 bolts evidently were either not in place or the nuts were off of them. So that they had bolts, a nut, a castle nut, and a cotter pin in there to keep the nut from rotating. If assembled properly, that is going nowhere ever. So they over-designed it clearly, and they put not just a nut and a bolt. They put a nut, bolt, and a pin in it so it wouldn't rotate off. That's a design. So from a design standpoint, they did all those things, Rosemary. What I'm saying is that somewhere down the line on the manufacturing side, somebody didn't put that together.
I'm starting to feel sorry for this hypothetical worker, because you don't even know that it was the bolt inserter who failed. Bolt inserter Susan might have been called away to work on something else before she ever got to that, and she told her supervisor.
Not on every airplane. They're essentially finding on like the vast majority of the airplanes.
Are they really? I didn't see that.
So do you honestly think that that poor Susan just did the wrong thing every time, and that's not a problem with her supervisor, whoever gave her training, whoever designed the quality method?
Rosemary, I'm not gonna call you out on that, but you've been in the manufacturing sites as much as I have, and you've seen stuff that just boggles your mind, right?
As a good engineer, someone who makes good designs for manufacture, I don't design something that relies on the workers doing the exact right thing every time. Your job doesn't stop there. Making a design that, if made perfectly, is going to do the job correctly. That's not the end of your design as your job as a design engineer for manufactured products. The end of your job is to make sure that not only when it's done perfectly it works, but in all situations that could ever conceivably happen in the factory, which definitely includes people having a bad day, losing the work instruction, getting called away to other things, and any conceivable issue, it still needs to be safe. And that is not, that's not, the responsibility doesn't end with the manufacturing worker, and it's not even mainly their fault.
Day 1 at mechanic school, bolt, nut, twist, right? That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about anything complicated. It was the world's most simple thing.
They didn't put them on wrong.
Yeah, no, that's why I'm saying that at some point it comes out of the person.
We're not going anywhere here. I can't think of anything different to say, but I'm convinced I've moved my position absolutely 0% from where I started. I've not moved at all.
I'm not asking you to move your position. What I'm saying is, it does seem weird that we apply 2 different rules to an organization that has a lot of hierarchy, a lot of checks and balances, and is intrinsically set up to have the redundancy in it. And we go to the other industry, which should have some of those things in place, and evidently didn't.
And it does. I can tell you. I've worked with Siemens and engineering and manufacturing also.
The wrinkles of blades is still happening way too much.
I'm not saying it's good, the situation, and I'm not saying that Siemens executives shouldn't be, ultimately held responsible. In neither case, it's the fault of the worker. It's not the fault of the worker for creating a wrinkle, even if it was possible to make it without a wrinkle if you were just a bit better at, smoothing the fabric as you put it in the mold. That's not their fault.
Quality?
I've said it like 100 times now. It's going to be really boring for whoever's listening to the podcast if we leave this bit in, but it's a series of steps.
Yeah, and I'm with you on the series of steps, but they made a mistake 600 plus times.
Yeah, and that's my point, is that when it's systematic, then that implies that it's not somebody having a bad day. That implies that there is something happening high up that has caused this pressure to make their systems break down. I'm not saying that's definitely what happened. You'd have to do a root cause analysis to, see what was happening in this specific case, but that is where I would start. why were all of these, if you've got, one thing that fails, then you can look at, all the different reasons. But when you have got a series of things that cascading failures, then you have to look systematically. It's just a logical place to start.
When you have more than 10 blades that go bad in a production sense, then I think you're in trouble. When you get to 600, you're really in trouble. That seems to be more systemic to me. That's my point.
Yeah, it's a huge serial defect. It's the biggest I've probably ever worked with.
It's a huge problem.
I think at the end of the day, Alan, I think what you're trying to say is the fact that one door issue at Boeing has people calling for the head of Boeing is ridiculous compared to the idea that 600 plus blades or issues have things and nobody's calling for the heads of Siemens Gamesa.
Yeah, I think I'm more surprised about the response to Siemens Gamesa than I am to Boeing, because I mean, honestly, it's not just one door at Boeing either. It's the previous failures where plenty of people did actually die and they're still doing dumb stuff like this. I mean, that says something about a company culture and leadership for sure. But yeah, Siemens Gamesa, how is it possible that we haven't? I don't know. We still need more time for things to come out, and I'm sure someone will be moved on.
Well, yeah, but I think everybody would agree here, right? That we want Siemens Gamesa to be successful, and it doesn't seem like they're making those basic steps that you would see in other organizations to get over this hurdle. It's continuing the pain.
From my experience working with the OEMs, I would say it's just as likely that they are taking the steps and they're just doing a terrible job of communication. I think their communication has been just atrocious. It's been nearly as designed to harm them as much as possible. It's but I see that really commonly. It's like the bulk of my job working, to help wind farm owners with their blade issues. The bulk of what I do is to help the manufacturers communicate what they're doing and reassure, the asset owners that the problem is being taken seriously and things that are happening are, being done correctly, because their instinct is just to hide everything and give these tiny bits of information that just really give off the impression that they're, that they think that you're an idiot, that that they're taking them for a ride. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's it, given that they're, similar culture throughout the whole wind industry. That's just the way that they seem to want to communicate to their customers for a reason that I cannot comprehend.